So, Galen, let's talk about Jay Edwards, who clearly is a guy that had the talent and the ability to be much higher on the list of the 50 greatest Hoosiers than he ended up being. But, of course, he had some well-chronicled issues, but also just some iconic moments, some incredible moments. And a lot of times when you talk about the 5 or 10 best players in Indiana history, just straight players, his name will come up. Tell me about Jay Edwards, what he meant to Indiana, and just kind of your reflections on his short but certainly memorable career as a Hoosier.
Well, Jay Edwards was a guy who everything was set up for him to be the next iconic Hoosier legend. And you gotta, this even goes back to high school. He's on those Marion high school teams that win 3 consecutive state titles in no class basketball. And, he was co-Mr. Basketball with Lyndon Jones, which really was, Lyndon was a good player, and he obviously didn't develop quite as much at the pro level or at the college level as Jay did. But Jay he really was the straw that stirred the drink with that. And really, it was interesting because he came to IU at a time when we needed a new hero. We just won the national title, and yes, Keith Smart hit the shot, but Steve Alford was the hero of that team. He was the iconic Hoosier figure. And so here you have this team in 87, 88 that needs a central figure to look at, a next great hope, I guess you could say, for IU basketball, and Jay Edwards seemed to fit the bill. He had, I still think, the best jump shot, the best looking jump shot of any IU player that I've ever seen. And, his freshman year, he had some problems. He missed some games due to suspension, and that was a weird year anyway. You had the post-championship hangover. You had the whole weird, bizarre Ricky Callaway situation where he just kind of got taken out of the mix of things almost completely and transferred at the end of the year. But you saw these flashes of promise with Jay Edwards where you're like, wow, this guy's going to be dynamite. And, people forget that following year, that 88-89 season, that was not a well-regarded team. That team was picked 6th in the Big Ten to start the season. That was a team that I think for the second, third, and fourth times in the Bob Knight era allowed 100 points, and they did it in the first 3 weeks of the season. They lost, I think, 102-78 to Syracuse, 106-92 to North Carolina, and 101-79 to Louisville. I'm not doing this off of memory. I just read that off of a screen. So,
and I remember that. Was that the Syracuse game where Sherman Douglas hiked it between his legs to a streaking Derek Coleman down the court? There was some ridiculous play like that. It was such a blowout.
I actually don't know because it was on ESPN, and we didn't get ESPN where I lived at that point in my career or my life, So, but no, it was not a well-regarded team. They started off kind of slow. I think they were 3-4 to start the year, and that team ended up winning the Big Ten title outright in a season where Illinois was probably the best team in the country, and Michigan ended up winning the national title. And they won the Big Ten because of Jay Edwards. Jay Edwards put on a string of just unbelievable performances. And some of them were just great offensive performances. Some of them were shots that won the game but weren't necessarily last-second shots. The game at Purdue comes to mind. The game at Michigan comes to mind there. But he had really 3 games in a row where he hit shots that were basically buzzer-beating, game-winning shots. You had the game versus Purdue at home where he had a shot at the very end that won the game. He had the Michigan game where he hits a 3 as time expires, and it was a ridiculous 3. It was one of those where Michigan misses, I think Glenn Rice misses a shot, and Edwards comes down the floor. I think you might just splice this video in, and nobody's paying attention to what's going on. Edwards gets the ball passed to him with a second left, and he just drifts back and fires this shot from, 24, 25 feet, and it goes in. That's the famous one where Bob Knight starts jumping up and down.
Jumping around, which you so rarely saw.
Yeah.
This is the way the game ended. Up.
The key is that the ball is released before the sound of the horns. Look at this guy. He's normally calm. He's cool. And right now he's going to be collective, too. Look at him.
Yeah, but you know what? The Indiana team, with a little time remaining and all the timeouts, it looked as if they might have expected him to call a timeout because they didn't move it all that swiftly up the court. It was almost a lackadaisical move up the court. He's standing on the sidelines, and I could almost hear him saying, shoot the damn thing, because time was running out.
And then the third one, and this is the one that unfortunately has gotten kind of lost in the sands of time, was the next home game where they played Illinois. Yeah. And, everybody remembers that Nick Anderson, takes a pass and throws up a 30-footer that goes in at the buzzer, and Illinois wins the game. What people forget is the only reason that even had to happen was that Jay Edwards hits this ridiculous fadeaway baseline shot that almost goes over the backboard and in. And you're just like, how the hell did this happen? He did it again. And unfortunately, Anderson had to ruin the party.
8 seconds on the clock. Guarded by Anderson. Drives to the corner. Drives all the way in. Fadeaway jumper is good at the gun.
There's no way that ball could go in. He was completely beyond the baseline. He shot it over the backboard. It went in. It was the most unbelievable shot in that situation I've ever seen. There's never been anything like it.
He was such a cool looking player too. I mean, he just had this look about him that was really different from anything I'd seen. And I really, I started watching IU basketball as a conscious human being, at about age 4 or 5, which would have been the 84-85 season basically. And, Alford had his thing, and, Keith Smart was really excitable, run around, but Edwards he didn't seem to have a pulse when he was out there. He was just cool as ice. And you just felt like if this guy had the ball in his hands in a pressure situation, he was going to be able to hit a shot and win the game. And he did it on so many occasions. And, unfortunately, that team gets forgotten about to some degree because they lost to what was a far better Seton Hall team than most people thought in the Sweet 16. But we thought, oh, this is great. We've got a lot to build on moving forward. And then, unfortunately, Edwards ends up deciding to enter the draft. And, he's talked about this many times about how he made a lot of bad decisions, both as far as going to the NBA and just life in general. He's a guy that most younger IU fans probably don't know about. And that's unfortunate because I think time and circumstance robbed him of a place probably I think if he had stayed all 4 years and had continued to develop, he'd be easily a top 10 IU player of all time, maybe top 5.
Yeah. I agree. And I think for a lot of longtime IU fans, they share that sentiment. And if we think about it, what's been interesting about doing this project is the timeline, because you forget about the timeline of players and where careers overlapped. So that was the 89-90 season, or 88.
That was 88-89.
But the next season, if I'm correct, is when the grand recruiting class of Chaney, Graham, and all those guys came in, right? So Edwards would have had 2 years playing with Calvert Chaney in that group, which is crazy to think about.
Well, and even crazier, he might have had a year playing with that group plus Damon Bailey, which would have been the 90-91 season. I mean, that team, people forget that team went 29-5 and 15-3, and won the Big Ten title. I mean, to think that he could have been a part of either of those teams is really remarkable. So the timeline's interesting, and I feel like the 87, 88, and 88, 89 teams really kind of got lost in the shuffle because you obviously had a national championship winning team right before them, and you had what was probably the second greatest recruiting class in IU history after them. And, that's a tough thing to be wedged in between, but there were a lot of great moments that came out of that 88, 89 team that I wish we still had on tape. When we do to some degree, but not to the degree that some of the earlier and later years have.
It's all right. We've got Bob Knight jumping around after that Michigan game, which may be the greatest gift Jay Edwards ever gave us. All right, Galen, thank you very much for your thoughts on Jay Edwards. Very, very, very helpful, very insightful.
Thank you.